Hi everyone, so today we'll be looking at chapter 7, and that's on the Great Interruption, World War I, and women's suffrage. So, starting with the suffrage and isolationism, we see how the Great War was full of promises of progressive reform and social and economic equality for everyone. Citizens versus the U.S. involvement, where the Mexican Revolution happened during 1910 to 1920. And during the Mexican Revolution, which was under the Woodrow Wilson administration, we see that Francisco Villa, Venustiano Carranza, and another man in 1914 did appeal U.S. during that time to help the city out. And the U.S. intervention was welcomed after the U.S. was interfering with events in Mexico. And then we see how the suffragists voiced their objections to military actions, and the military used to protect American interests. And then we see Fanny Garson, who is a suffragist, a civil rights activist, pacifist, and a pacifist. And during April 23rd, 1914, she chaired a meeting, and the meeting protested the invasion of Mexico. The meeting was at the Cooper Union, and radical suffragists expressed their refusal to support war. And we see that on page 144, where it states, to highlight their refusal to support war, a few of the most radical suffragists connected with the Women's Political Union took the will and won't pledge, vowing they would not support philanthropic cause until they secured the right to vote. And anti-suffragists' decision of the policy of peace or war should be left to the men of the nation. And we see that on page 144 as well. And then going into the assassination of Asturian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, that happened June 28, 1914. This assassination triggered events such as the German invasion of Belgium, which happened August 4th, and the Great War. The news from the war covered over suffrage news, and these events made it hard for suffragists to focus on their work. And suffrage included references of suffragists included references of war in their news. To keep the attention on suffrage, Vera Borman, White House, chair of New York State Women's Suffrage Party, Helen Rogers, treasurer, they all raised additional money. And on page 145, the resulted in the donation of at least the money that they raised resulted in a donation of at least some of the money for going towards the war relief, and especially after the United States entered the war, for war material. And May 7th, 1915, the German submarine sank the Lusitania, where 1,200 passengers and 124 Americans were killed. And 3 days after that exact attack, Wilson made a speech in Philadelphia. And on page 145, we go down a few lines, to the bottom of the first paragraph, where it says, "There is such a thing as a man being too proud to fight. There is such a thing as a nation being so right that it does not need to convince others by force that it is right." So this part, which they show people that their leader, Wilson, the United States, wanted no involvement in major war. So he wanted to keep from it. And we look at how war affects people's opinions. How does it shift and stuff? And we see that people's opinions shift to the direction of military commitment to the war. And we go to suffrage, war relief, and war preparedness. So, August 1914, German invasion of Belgium and the horrors they face. Many women's organizations offered relief. Suffragists raised relief funds with their suffrage activities. And on page 146, if we can go to 146, this persuades some women to embrace the war preparedness cause. And the anti-suffrage side of it all, of this part, anti-suffragists argue that suffragists put a price on their war service activities, and New York antis encourage 1 day a week, rolling bandages, and replacing typing with sewing. Anti-suffragist perspective: by granting women voting rights, anti-suffragists advocate for truce. So on page 146, if we go down to the last row, the last paragraph, by granting women the right to vote would increase the cost of democracy by requiring more voting booths, more election inspectors, and the need to count more votes. And Gertrude Foster Brown mentions on 147, women suffer same as men. Women positioned in political decision making were mostly suffragists who made that political decision. And suffrage, now looking at suffrage and pacifism. Suffragists wore work, engage in writing and activism to peace movement. 1914 to 1917, anti-suffragists advertised suffragists for their lack of patriotism. Many people and anti-suffragists found pacifism and patriotism incompatible. So on August 29, 1914, many people gathered to protest the carnage in Europe, which is on Fifth Avenue. And it was not a suffrage parade, but at the same time, what did suffrage do? So if we go to page 149 to the end of the last paragraph, the beginning of the last paragraph, where it says, many women carried yellow flowers to represent the suffrage movement, and organizers contended that they could not have staged the protest without the help and experience of suffragists. And anti-suffragists Annie Nathan Myers refused to join Women's Peace Party, and as well she claimed men dominate peace societies instead women's because women cannot make the right choices for a nation alone. And of course Carrie Chapman, mentioned on page 155. So we can go to 155. She instructed her people to work for both the war and suffrage. And also we can go down to where it says, most importantly, with years of experience, suffragists knew exactly how to raise vast sum of money quickly. So we see that because of the experience of suffragists, they know how to raise the money and share it equally for the war and for their cause. And then we see government leaders at state and national level did not, on the 155 at the bottom, right at the bottom on there, did not appreciate nor know how to utilize the extraordinary talents and resources the organized suffragists placed at their disposal in 1917. And then the United States declares war. So Wilson won re-election, and U.S. declared war on Germany. April 6, 1917, U.S. officially entered war against Germany. Far fewer events related to suffrage campaigning in New York increased in war-related activities. Anti-suffragists and suffragists joined the National League of Women's Services. And the National League of Women's Services is along the line of constructive patriotism. And patriotic women contribute labor and resources to the war effort. And they devised programs of voluntary rationing, such as abiding by suggestions for meatless Mondays and wheatless Tuesdays, to reserve these foods for the troops. Suffragists' responsibilities to the federal and state governments based on experiences with war and organizations. And on 156, Gertrude Foster Brown related New York suffragists